Hello, and you are listening to Talk to Seattle, and I am your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode of the show, I have Jason Strekal, Political Director at the National Association for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. It's easy to forget here in Washington, especially here in Seattle, that there are people right now being persecuted and put in jail just for enjoying an herb. So I'm really happy that Justin was able to come on and talk to us a little bit about the fight to end this insane prohibition. If you're listening to this show, you are probably a fan of podcasting, and you'd probably appreciate local content. So I might have something interesting for you. I made this list. It's a list of podcasts, of Seattle area podcasts. This list is intended to be a complete catalog of every podcast from the Seattle area. We have hundreds of podcasts on there right now. So if you're looking for more locally produced independent media, this list is for you. You can find a list at seattlepodcasters.com/list. Like I said, there's hundreds of podcasts on this list, and we even have categories. I've got categories for food and drink, civics and politics. We've got geek culture. We've got a section for D&D. There are just so many awesome shows on there. Please check it out. Once again, it's at seattlepodcasters.com/list. And remember, this is supposed to be a complete list. So if you have a podcast, or if you know someone who does have a podcast and they're not on the list, please contact me as soon as possible and I will add them. So one more time, to find hundreds of local podcasts, just go to seattlepodcasters.com/list. And if you don't remember, there's going to be a link, of course, in the show notes. This is Talk to Seattle, and I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode of the show, I'm here with Jason Strekal of NORML. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Jason. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. So could you tell me a little bit about the mission of NORML?
Absolutely. So NORML, or as we go by, but better known as the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, we are an organization that's been around nearly 50 years, fighting for the rights of individuals who choose to consume cannabis, be it for therapeutic or private purposes, so that way they're not treated as second-class citizens under the law. And we are engaged in policy fights in all 50 states and at the federal level. And we're feeling really good about the momentum that we have behind us right now. And we're looking forward to see what 2019 has to offer.
50 years. My gosh, that's a long time. You know, some people I think this effort just began, but it's been years and years in the making.
Absolutely. When NORML was first founded, Gallup had just started tracking public opinion surveys of Americans' views on whether or not marijuana should be legalized, and it was polling at only 12% of the population. So how quickly it has been now, Gallup's most recent poll shows 66% support, with outright majorities of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, majorities in every region of the country, by nearly every demographic breakdown, support the outright legalization and regulated marketplace of marijuana.
Gosh, that is just incredible. That is so great. I mean, I just remember when I was much younger, you know, the idea of marijuana legalization was there's so much hysteria tied to it, as if, you know, if you do this, like the society will crumble.
No, absolutely. And that's a terrific point, because reefer madness has truly been baked into the cake since the onset of prohibition. If you look at the history of the leading figure who responsible for the national criminalization of cannabis, it's a gentleman by the name of Harry Anslinger, who in the late 30s had just lost his job as an enforcer of alcohol prohibition and was looking for what was next for him. And he decided to go the route that he had known best, which is, how do we criminalize a substance that a sizable segment of the population enjoys? And the foundational roots of the hysteria surrounding marijuana was heavily rooted in racism and xenophobia. And that's actually why we call it marijuana instead of cannabis, whereas marijuana is just the Spanish word for cannabis. But he kept on using it again and again and again to create this this fear of Mexicans and of the Negro jazz musicians, as Anslinger would say, causing all this panic amongst the God-fearing Christians of white America, which is really what ultimately brought upon the prohibition.
And your organization supports both medical and recreational use?
Absolutely. We think that for no matter what purposes of which you consume, be it for therapeutic application to alleviate some of the most debilitating diseases known to man or their symptoms, or just for a simple pleasurable experience of unwinding, not unlike having a martini or a beer after work.
Except much safer.
Absolutely. By every measurable objective standard, marijuana is less harmful than currently legal and regulated alcohol and cigarettes. And we could make the case why marijuana is safer than most of the things you can buy in your grocery store right now.
So how many states in the USA is marijuana recreationally legal?
As of right now, voters in 9 states have passed laws to not only legalize marijuana, but to set up a regulated marketplace for its direct-to-consumer sale. And then the 10th state is Vermont, where they actually were the first state to legislatively remove the criminalization of marijuana. But what they failed to do when they did that earlier in 2018 was set up that kind of a regulated marketplace. So we anticipate that getting passed in the coming year or two. So we have 10 states for adult use marijuana, and nationwide, when it comes to medical marijuana, in 33 states, there are either implemented programs or that are in the process of being implemented, which, for me in my role as NORML's federal lobbyist, I'm often talking to members of the Senate, reminding them that 66 senators hail from states where either the people or the legislature has chosen to pass a medical marijuana program, constituting 66 senators, well above the filibuster-proof majority needed to enact comprehensive reform.
And is there any appetite for that at the federal level of actually doing major reform?
It's growing by the day. For a long time, marijuana reform was largely a fringe issue, relegated to the vocal support of very, very few lawmakers. But it seems, nearly every week there's a new legislator finding his way to politically evolve to be able to co-sponsor pending legislation or introduce some kind of new proposed policy fix. We, in the 115th Congress, we now have 10% of both chambers of Congress on one piece of legislation that would remove marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act, as well as address some of the reparative justice components to lessen the suffering of those who have been harmed as a result of its criminalization. All in all, there's over 20 members of the U.S. Senate who are on some kind of comprehensive reform that would at least protect the states that have moved forward in defiance of federal prohibition. And in the House of Representatives, we're looking at over 25% of the House is currently co-sponsoring similar legislation.
And do you think the states are relatively safe from federal interference? I know we've just had a new change in the Attorney General, and the previous one was rather anti-marijuana.
Oh, Jeff Just Say No Sessions was stricken by a serious case of reefer madness. He made some of the most outlandish statements you can possibly believe when it comes to individuals' choices to consume marijuana. The former Attorney General, he talked a big game, and he did make a number of policy tweaks at the federal level for the Department of Justice, which we believed were a lead up to a potential cannabis crackdown. But he never pulled the trigger before he was terminated by President Trump. So he did make changes such as ending what was known as the Holder Doctrine to increase the number of criminal charges that would be levied upon individuals charged with a federal drug crime, as well as civil asset forfeiture changes, which would mean when state and local law enforcement work with federal agents on a federal bust, if you will, then those state and local law enforcement agents would get a bigger cut of the seized assets. So what we anticipate could be coming down under a new attorney general, should they so choose to have enforcement actions, is state agents going in, seizing existing businesses, seizing their land, seizing their property, seizing their product, seizing their cash. And what they can do is they can charge those assets as a separate criminal charge only against the property, and then hold those assets indefinitely. So, unfortunately, this is a relatively common practice of civil asset forfeiture, where law enforcement is effectively stealing from citizens accused of a crime, and those seizures come long before a judge would even rule on the merits of that criminal charge against the individual. So we don't know, who is going to end up being the attorney general. There seems to be a very serious constitutional question about whether Whitaker is even in good standing to be named attorney general, which we can add to the number of constitutional crises that our country is currently facing during the Trump era. And how it's going to play out in the cannabis sphere is still yet to be determined.
And I've been talking to different people here in my state of Washington who have marijuana businesses. And one thing they face all the time is a lot of federal regulations regarding banking that makes their lives very difficult. Is there any progress being made on that front?
We hope to be able to achieve progress there in the next Congress. There are over 95 members of the House of Representatives currently co-sponsoring legislation coming from Senator Merkley out of Oregon and Senators Heck and Perlmutter out of Colorado. Denny Heck's from Washington, excuse me. Over 95 members in the House, over 20 members in the Senate. So those are kind of some of our bigger bills where we have the more support. But I think it's got to be a part of a more comprehensive package. While I personally am very, very sympathetic to the frustrations of those business owners, I think it's paramount that we not leave behind individuals who are still being arrested for what is now legal and commonplace in the state of Washington, for example. So when I get brought up that issue from lawmakers, I often talk to them and say that we are fully in support of reform to allow for basic banking services for cannabis businesses. But my priority and my focus is making sure that individuals' civil liberties and freedoms are not being continue to be infringed upon by the state. And we hope to be able to combine those together, because both would be solved by a descheduling of marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act.
Yeah, that's so true. I remember, maybe a couple weeks ago, everyone was talking about the cannabis stocks. Now it's the whole news cycle there, but no one talked about the victims, the people that are being put in jail for something that just across the state line is legal.
Absolutely. And it's a disturbing trend that we're seeing happening right now, even in the age of emerging legalization. In 2016, there were 653,000 individuals who were put in handcuffs as a result of a marijuana charge nationwide. And then this is 2016, the same year in November, that 4 additional states voted to outright legalize marijuana, including the largest state in the Union, California. And then an additional 4 states voted to implement a medical program. The following year, in 2017, there were 659,000 plus individuals put in handcuffs. So we actually saw the total number of arrests go up, even with 8 states having reformed their laws. So, it's an incredibly disturbing trend, and it's what I often refer to as the death rattles of prohibition. There is still a very large segment of the law enforcement community that desperately does not want to give up their ability to escalate an interaction with an individual on the suspicion of marijuana. And it's disproportionately our brothers and sisters in communities of color and in economically disadvantaged areas where we're seeing this kind of structural oppression really play out. So it's incredibly important that our friends and allies in the marijuana industry while we certainly wish them the best as they conduct their business on the day-to-day level and achieve the American dream of being successful in commerce, that they not forget the roots of the economy for which they are now benefiting from, and for those who are still suffering as a result of criminalization.
Are there any efforts to have like amnesty for people that have been convicted of marijuana possession or cleaning people's records?
Yes, and that is something that is beginning to pick up more and more steam. Washington actually has the infamy of being one of the most restrictive legal states that there are. Part of the legalization process in Washington had a prohibition on individuals who have a criminal record from working in the newly legal industry. So let's say you were, as a young man, perhaps acting outside the bounds of the law, and you were caught with simple possession. If you hadn't gotten that off your record through the process of petitioning the courts, hiring attorneys, et cetera, then you wouldn't be able to even sweep the floors at a dispensary. But we're very optimistic about the trends that we're going since 2012. For example, in California, Governor Brown just last month signed legislation which will automatically expunge nonviolent marijuana possession records from individuals' criminal histories. So the trend is definitely moving in the right direction. We have to keep up the drumbeat of ensuring that we're getting some sense of relief or justice for those who have been harmed. And we still have a far way to go, even in legal states like Washington.
So I keep on hearing a lot about CBD oil and how it's legal federally. Can you tell me, is that true? I don't think that it is.
Regarding the issue of CBD's legality federally, there was a provision in the 2014 Farm Bill which explicitly offered protections for states that chose to do a hemp pilot program for specialty licensed cultivators from public universities or state's Department of Agriculture for research purposes. And part of that statute used the word marketing. So there was this legal theory that was concocted as a result of this, that a lot of individuals are arguing because it says that they can research marketing, they extrapolate that to mean non-specialty licensed retail sales. The DEA does not agree with that interpretation. The Ninth Circuit of Appeals does not agree with that interpretation. We here at NORML do not agree with that interpretation. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell does not agree with that interpretation. So no, that when you read online that CBD is legal in all 50 states, it is a perpetuation of a flawed legal theory that has been struck down by the courts. That being said, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has amended the Farm Bill that's still pending in the current Congress to actually take that next step and remove hemp from the Controlled Substances Act, and which would allow hemp-derived CBD to be sold direct to consumer without a specialty license, pending that a state removes it from its state codes. To date, only two states, the very progressive states of Indiana and Kansas, have passed statutory language explicitly authorizing the unspecialty licensed retail sale of hemp-derived CBD. Just to get a little bit more into the weeds here, though, when I talk to hemp farmers, they tell me that they're completely compliant with the components of the hemp plant that are exempt under federal law. But then I talk to them off the record, and you cannot derive CBD oil from the stalk of the plant. And so it's disingenuous at best. It's criminal at worst. And it's another aspect where we're really going to need consumer protections and regulations, because the Journal of American Medicine, or the JAMA network, recently did a study where they went in and they tested the products at 87 different retail locations that were purporting to be selling CBD products. And they found that 70% of the products that they sampled or they tested were not what they were purported to be. So we this is an area where, increasingly people are looking at CBD for issues ranging from reducing their anxiety to dealing with chronic pain to even simply sleeping better or just feeling a little bit more awake. We need consumer protections on that, because we need to make sure that for people who are choosing to ingest something, that they have the certainty of knowing what it is, and that includes CBD levels and other components that could be in these concoctions. Because unfortunately, right now, what you're seeing on a lot of those shelves is simply snake oil.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That is so true. And I feel so bad for the people that might be buying these products for medical needs and then feeling, oh, well, it doesn't work for me. Well, maybe they got scammed, unfortunately. It's so frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, not a month goes by where we don't hear from, at least a couple different stores that just had state agents in their store seizing the CBD product, and they're calling us and they're saying, will you represent us pro bono? They're infringing upon our rights. And we say, no, you broke the law, but here's a list of attorneys that you could seek to retain as legal counsel. And as you said, it's particularly when we're talking about individuals' health care, there is nothing more disingenuous or wrong to promise someone some kind of relief and then completely lie to them about the contents of that compound.
Well, so going forward, what are the future plans for NORML?
That's a great question. So for me personally, just speaking as Jason Strekal, not for NORML, I can't wait to not work here. I'm driven by the belief that individuals should not be treated like second-class citizens under the law. And from my own personal experiences growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, and having a few run-ins with the law with friends of mine and seeing the disparities in the sentences that were handed down amongst my friends in the rulings by judges, where, I got a 40-hour a week, 40 hours of community service and court costs, whereas my best friend got a much, much more severe fine, which included a year of probation, a year of drug testing. He had to pay exorbitant fees. And the only difference between the two of us was the color of our skin. So what fuels my fight in this area is the criminalization element. But that being said, for NORML, in the post-legal age, there is still a role for having a consumer advocate. And there are a lot of different aspects that are going to be needed to be addressed in this ever-evolving consumer marketplace, ranging from oversight and testing of products, continuing to address statutory issues in regards to the discrimination amongst individuals' ability to get health care, where we're seeing medical patients being denied organ transplants as a result of cannabis consumption, even though there's no correlation between the two. Employment protections, making sure that there's sanity in our DUID laws, because unfortunately, right now most states have laws on the books where it's impairment is attempted to be detected by blood tests or urinalysis, whereas neither of them have a correlation with an actual impairment level. Child custody issues and making sure that we're not taking away children from their families as a result of a nosy neighbor who may disapprove of of someone who consumes cannabis. Again, even though it's they may get home every night and have a couple glasses of wine. there's a lot of other elements of the law that are still going to be need to address once we get that initial breakdown of federal prohibition. And NORML is in the best position with, tens of thousands of members throughout the country, hundreds of thousands of people who follow our work and contact lawmakers through our tech tools and follow our legislative tracking. And I think that the work is truly just beginning as far as making sure that there's an industry that is accessible to those who have been most harmed in the drug war. And it's going to be a knockout fight to make sure that those who have been the most economically impacted as a result of criminalization have the opportunity to benefit from marijuana's legalization.
And how can people get involved?
There's a lot of different ways to get involved. We got activities for all levels of commitment. We have over 150 chapters throughout the country and a couple dozen internationally that are all organized to varying degrees. We, as a federated structure, all of our chapters are their own independent organizations that work with us, and we provide them resources such as all of the information that they could need, tech tools on the back end. We do a lot of lobbying support, but you get to create your own organization on the local level, because what we need people who are going into city council rooms, going into those the regulators' meetings, and continuing to be that voice that tireless and often thankless work of being a citizen and an active participant in the democratic process. At the bare minimum, individuals can get on our email list, follow us on social media, and when called upon, we make it incredibly easy for citizens to contact their lawmakers and support our opposition to various legislation that we're tracking in their state. So we need people to speak up. And now's the time. So all of your listeners can find out more at NORML.org if they're interested in joining a local chapter or starting their own. I know in Washington State, our Washington chapter is led by Kevin Oliver, and they've done remarkable work as far as trying to make sure that issues surrounding the state's Clean Air Act doesn't adversely impact local farmers, making sure that there's sanity in the new regulations that are coming about. Desperately, I know that they're still working on trying to get the lawful right to home cultivate a limited number of plants, because as of right now, if Washington state lawmakers wanted to be able to enter your house, they'd be able to say, oh, well, we smell marijuana, therefore we suspect you're growing marijuana, which is illegal, and be able to enter your house as a result. So we fight hard for at least the limited right to home cultivate. And there's a lot of things going on. So again, all your listeners can find out more at NORML.org and really be a part of the movement.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today, and thank you so much for your work. Thank you.
Hey, no, thank you for having me, Jason. Appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk.
Thank you so much, Justin, for taking the time and coming on the show and doing this interview and talking with my audience. I really appreciate your time, but more importantly, I appreciate the work that you are doing. If you want to learn more about the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, all links are going to be in the show notes. You have been listening to Talk to Seattle. I've been your host, Jason Rigden. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Talk to Seattle is hosted and produced by me, Jason Rigden. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please email jason@talktoseattle.com. Our theme music was Lobby Time by Kevin MacLeod, Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0